Although the troubles of our world hang heavy in the atmosphere and to a considerable degree affect us, our own private troubles remain the most difficult to cope with. Actually, man is so constituted that he does not respond emotionally or psychically to vast subjects which are beyond his comprehension, unless war or disaster come very close to us. We simply cannot energize them in our personal thinking. We know about them, we feel about them, we regret all the ills of mankind, but we really give the greatest amount of libido to our own immediate situations, and therefore a reasonably secure life, a reasonably well integrated life, depends largely upon our ability to cope with small matters. Little immediate nagging situations have a tendency to gradually wear us down, to take away the basic joys of life, to tip us into neurotic situations. Consequently, each of us is faced with the immediate necessity of observing and contemplating our own conduct and its direct effect upon those we care for or those who depend upon us in various relationships. Today, negative thinking arises largely from a series of discontent factors. We have a great many people who come and tell us the sad story of why they are not happy. Their discontent is the result of numerous pressures that are forced upon them by the times in which we live. These pressures are also rather personal and immediate, although perhaps we think of them as cosmic in their importance. One thing that probably affects us all is this pressure of dissatisfaction, which we are told in many sources is really a very healthy thing. We should be dissatisfied, we are told. We are assured that dissatisfaction stimulates us to greater effort, and that discontent impels us to rise to new heights of personal accomplishment. Perhaps in small dosage this is true, but when discontent becomes too general, it can hardly be said to be therapeutically safe or sound as a basic concept of living. We certainly should recognize that we are not all that we might be. This should certainly be a constant impulse to self-improvement. We should continually try to be better than we are. And this self-improvement may require gradual changes in our environment, improvement in our economic situations, freedom from want and fear. But all in all, discontent, when it becomes as universal as it is today, is simply a negative habit. Many persons who are discontented cannot even define their own feelings. They are simply moving along upon a surface of a general stream of attitude, which is present everywhere in our way of life. We are living probably the highest standard, the standpoint of physical living, that the world has ever known. The average person has more advantages, more opportunities than ever before in history. We have raised ourselves from a standard of meeting the needs of life to the standard of desiring most of the luxuries that life can bestow. Yet as we seem to improve in our living, that we have better homes, larger television sets, the general discontent does not seem to diminish. We are still more or less unhappy. One example of this was brought to me not long ago by a widowed lady who was the mistress of a large home. She had a house that was large enough for several persons to live comfortably, and she lived alone. She had all the things she wanted and most of the luxuries that life could bring, and confidentially told me that she felt as though she was a dried bean rattling around in a tin can. These things brought her no satisfaction at all. She wandered around in a house that was too big for her. She wandered about in a way of life that was really too big for her. It meant finally that the only way she could make it endurable was to become immersed in all kinds of social activities which she really did not enjoy. It ended up by the house being used as a sort of cafeteria to feed her friends. Actually, her first thought was to find a smaller house. Well, there was another possible answer to it. If situations are too big for us, we must either move out of them or we must grow ourselves. It's quite possible that she could have done something rather important or valuable with this unnecessary load had she become a more important person herself. In these times, the individual either has to grow up to the right use of the privileges he enjoys, or these privileges become heavy burdens upon his consciousness. He is not happy. Happiness some way fits into a pattern of simple and direct procedures. And the more we have, the more we become enslaved to the very problems of possession. Management today is a heavy responsibility. The more we have to manage, the more tension and worry we experience. There have been several individuals who have come and talked to me about planning studies for themselves. They would like to improve their thinking, settle down to some nice, quiet program of self-development. When you try to help them to organize this, however, they suddenly come up with some such a statement as, "This is all wonderful, but I have no time." Well, why have you no time? Well, I have to manage my affairs. I have 3 lawsuits, 2 or 3 other difficult situations, property running down, taxes going up, and instead of being able to take the proper advantage of what might be termed securities, we suddenly find ourselves hopelessly dominated by the responsibilities of things. These responsibilities wear us out and leave us embittered and disillusioned, and no real incentive to do quiet, useful, valuable things in life. So we have discontents of many kinds. Those who have not are discontented, those who have are discontented. And in all the intervals between, there is tension, stress, and discouragement. Wherever the economic pressures become too heavy in the lives of people, there is a tendency for the monetary factor to assume too great an importance. This very factor brings with it most of the antagonisms and debilities from which our present generation seems to be suffering. Psychologically, we are under the pressure of the delusions of success. instead of being these underprivileged people of ancient times who were fighting for the right to exist, we are in some way trying to struggle through a higher standard of living than we know how to use. And something has to be done, or the individual gradually disintegrates under these pressures. One approach to the whole problem is to take some kind of an inventory of what we have and what it is doing for us or to us. And if we discover that we are too much the victims of what might be termed the management of success, then it is possible that we have to make a decision of some kind. We have to decide where our values are. If all that we have is possession, if our whole life is associated with the objects to which we are attached, then it is obvious that we cannot easily release ourselves from them without a terrible sense of loss. If, however, we are becoming a little disillusioned about all this, and beginning to suspect that what we have will never substitute for the need of our own character, then perhaps there is something we can do about it. We can give up rather easily that to which we are no longer inordinately attached. If we are really to the point where we are pretty weary with false values, we can probably drop a good many of them. But if the process of dropping them hurts us too badly, then we are not really ready to be released from them. All in all, I think today our discontents arise from levels which as human beings we should have begun to outgrow. There seems to be so much evidence that man improves his conditions much more rapidly than he improves himself. And where there is too much inconsistency between what we have and what we are, there is always trouble. Perhaps one of the simple problems is to bear in mind always that the human being is essentially a rather simple creature. Given a reasonable amount of happiness, and other motives are no longer very dominant, the happy person is not overly ambitious. The unhappy person is simply taking out his pressures upon conditions around him. As we have noted before, nearly all of the great pioneers of industry and economics who have fashioned vast empires for themselves have been basically unhappy people. Many a millionaire has built his fortune as a defense against a broken home. Gradually we turn from the things that hurt, usually personal things, and try to find some type of forgetfulness. And one way to forget small hurts is to bury oneself in huge endeavors. We turn away from the simple situations that we cannot control and move into larger areas where our difficulties are not so immediately noticeable to ourselves. If we surround our personal business with able executives and adequate financing, we can build some kind of a successful business in the majority of cases. If we have reasonable aptitudes and some skill and a fair amount of business judgment, we can be successful in this rather impersonal empire of business development. In this area, we can also find opportunities to lead where leadership is not possible in personal affairs. We find people that we can boss sometimes, and we take out all our unhappiness on them. We sense new responsibilities when we have stockholders, and we create new dedications to maintaining dividends. All these processes take us away from the immediate fact the really evident fact that as individuals we are not successful. Some way we must find the secret of personal success. If we achieve this, perhaps we can maintain larger interests constructively. Perhaps we can be successful in various other activities. But if we are not successful in personal living, we will certainly end up with a thrombosis or diabetes or arthritis or one of the other slow killers which destroy our happiness or our physical securities even as we build up our economic patterns. So somewhere we have to begin life, base life, upon a kind of contentment. The individual must work from an inner peace, an inner quietude, or everything else that he does complicates his existence rather than advancing it. And most persons simply are afraid to face these heart-to-heart talks with themselves. They have fear of too many things. I know many people who are very afraid of their own families. They're afraid of their children. They're afraid of their relatives. They're afraid of the small daily contacts that they have. I've talked to hundreds of persons who say very frankly they cannot sit down and talk with their own families. They cannot let go of themselves and tell of their problems or their hurts or their responsibilities or their anxieties, even to those who should be closest to them. After all, friendship and relationship should give a certain release to the individual through the fact that he has someone in this world to whom he can talk, and who will at least give a reasonable degree of understanding. But due to the very situation that prevails, if an individual finally reaches the point where he breaks down and starts to tell his story, the individual who he tells it to finds this a glorious opportunity to extrovert his own difficulties. So it becomes a competitive problem of which one is suffering the most. And this leads to very little solution. I suspect that if more people could talk to those close to them, a large number of psychologists would have time to take care of more responsible cases. Many individuals today are spending from $15 to $50 an hour simply to talk to a professional listener. They want to unburden their problems on someone. They find that to go along locking everything within themselves is just too difficult. That it is really very necessary under some conditions to find some break in this armament of complete self-centeredness, which we perhaps contribute to, but which certainly we suffer from nearly every day. So discontent can arise just simply from locking too much inside of ourselves. We build more and more negative patterns of anxieties because we do not know the facts. And here we find very often a situation that comes to focus after a death. We have had many discussions with persons who have just lost a loved one. And going through the family papers and the will and going through all the various details that apply in the settlement of an estate, the survivor suddenly realizes something of what the person who has passed on carried with them as a psychic load. And many of the survivors have said, if I had only known the facts, I could have made life much easier for this other person, and perhaps they would have lived much longer. But we simply do not think, we do not know. If the individual with whom we are working is locked, we make very little real effort to unlock them. And as most persons are interested primarily in their own troubles, the individual who is seeking desperately for an outlet to express his difficulties finds little but a wall of other persons' troubles surrounding him. There must be some simple human way of breaking through a situation of this kind. There must be some way in which the natural sympathies of life can particularly express themselves through persons who have intimate associations and who could be of the greatest help to each other. One of the problems that we have that is contributing to our vast load of psychoanalytical burden is the fact that the average individual has no longer much opportunity to orient himself in the simple ways of life. He is no longer able to find the opportunity to share his thinking or his problems with others. Young people starting out in life together fall in love and marry and really believe that they are going to spend the rest of their years making each other happy. In 6 months to a year, this tendency too often dies out, and each one of the persons settled back to the quiet process of making himself happy, if necessary, at the expense of the other. We are all so anxious to take care of our own feelings that we simply have lost the communion that existed in older times. Furthermore, in the older days, the demands for common understanding were greater than they are now. We had to solve problems ourselves. We had to work these things out. In those days, and it wasn't so very long ago, life centered around rather simple patterns. These patterns had to work or life was unendurable. Today, however, whenever close sympathies are not established or break down, the individual simply turns to outside interests. He simply turns away from the problem instead of heading into it. And when the home is not too peaceful and happy, the members begin to scatter, heading each in his own direction, rather than remaining as in the old days and sort of fighting it out. Out of this older association, some tragedies did certainly arise, but also there were many solutions. We have just as many tragedies today. They're a little different, but we do not have very many solutions arising from the realization that when we settle into a pattern, we have to work that pattern through into some successful termination. In this world, in spite of our general thinking, while we are all more or less alike, there are certain differences in temperament and character that have to be understood. Each person trying desperately to be understood is forgetting the importance of trying to understand. Each individual feeling that life is actually an opportunity for him to do as he pleases fails to notice the importance of trying to bring along with him into contentment others upon whose characters and attitudes his own happiness largely rests. Very few persons can be happy all by themselves. It is very difficult to be really contented in a situation in which other persons near to us are unhappy. Therefore, our own happiness to a large measure depends upon helping other people to find better orientation, to find better ways of communication with us. In every home, therefore, there is unfinished business that needs the doing. And if we are really serious people, if we're really trying to make a better world, there is a very good place to start in our own immediate affairs and problems. The race is divided, humanity is divided into several different basic psychological groups. These groups have to learn to understand each other. Now, we have tried to get some of this understanding out of textbooks, but unfortunately, these are not especially adequate. They are rather too scientific, too dogmatic, they are too impersonal to be very helpful in most cases. We can say that the average group of persons will include not only the introvert but the extrovert, and not only these basic patterns, but varying degrees of sensitivity. We have to realize that we cannot assume that all persons have the same measure of psychic sensitivity in themselves. Some are born with temperaments in which there is tremendous psychic protection against shock and stress. These individuals will go along, they may hurt other people, but they are seldom hurt themselves. They have an armament protecting their own attitudes. This armament can sometimes get them into serious trouble also, but it does mean that they can be under greater stress than some other people. In every group also there will be some extremely sensitive people. These extremely sensitive persons have almost no defense against psychic hurt. These individuals can be continuously hurt by situations that others may hardly notice. An unkind word can sometimes damage these people more terribly than some vast shock could a person who is less sensitive. And where we are constantly working with people, especially in family relationships, we have to realize that we cannot treat all of these people the same, any more than we can be treated the same as all the others. Each person is an individual, and we have to gradually learn through observation, experimentation, and reflection how to handle people. If we haven't time for this because we are only interested in our own happiness, we will ultimately end in a very lonely and isolated situation. Little by little, the self-centered person is punished by being left alone. And in advanced years especially, this is not a happy prospect. So we have all kinds of chemistries to work with. And we assume, with some degree of value, that we have within ourselves an intuitive mechanism or an instinctual mechanism by which we are able to judge other people if we want to. We can really learn what will make others happy if we really desire to know this. But between this sensitivity within ourselves, which will catch the moods of others and interpret these moods, there is continually this pressure of self-purpose, which makes us comparatively indifferent and makes us consider that time wasted in pleasing others is time sacrificed from our measure of time allotment in which to please ourselves. So most discontented persons have made too much of an effort to try to please themselves. They have not studied life accurately. They have not recognized the true importance of adjusting to the real, substantial needs of those around them. Now, this does not mean that we have to go around sacrificing ourselves to every whim and mood of someone else. To do this is to do them no good, and probably to burden ourselves. There are a certain number of these self-sacrificing souls also who develop a kind of martyr complex and are really never in a position to feel that they've done their duty unless someone else has made them miserable. This is not the attitude we are seeking at all. What we are really looking for somewhere in this pattern is an honest communion, an honest ability to settle down and share with people values and convictions that are really important. Now, one problem that arises very frequently is that somewhere along the line, one of the members of a family wakes up. This individual suddenly comes face to face with the facts of the matter. They realize exactly what is wrong, and they know that something should be done about it. This is not easy, however, because usually this one individual who wakes up is opposed by all the other members of the group. This means that actually the other members, in some cases at least, haven't awakened. They haven't sensed the real importance of facing facts. And where one tries to do it and the others resent, the matter becomes again abortive. Nothing is truly and completely accomplished. The only answer to a large part of this problem is social education. The real answer lies in the fact that we should be equipped for the basic relationships of life, just as surely as we are equipped to cope with the multiplication table. That we should learn the imports and exports of Patagonia for a certain year may be delightful. But then when we take this time for such a purpose and fail to have any time to learn about the basic relationships which we will all face in the years ahead, something is wrong in our concept of education. It is true that we do have to be educated in order to have careers or professions or arts or trades suitable to our survival. But it is a mistake to gain the skill to make a good living and then have a perfectly miserable life because we do not know how to meet the basic emergencies of existence. Now, if it is to continue as is now the case, where this subject is going to be generally ignored from the public standpoint, and we are forced to carry on this private struggle to grow up, then the individual has to take a greater amount of leadership in the management of his own affairs. He will have to learn what he is not taught. And if the schools do not give him this instruction, then he will have to find ways of bestowing it upon himself. The best time to start, naturally, with this type of thinking is if young people starting out together in marriage, in the first year of marriage, would include some basic mutual instruction in these problems. If they would approach life with a little greater insight, they would guarantee their relationships over a longer period of time in the future. At the present time, 1/3 of all American homes fail visibly and technically in our courts of law. Another third is as bad, but is not broken simply due to religious limitations and restrictions. Statistics indicate that about 10% of our homes are really compatible. Now, this is not the way it should be. And discontents, which go out into all forms of social relationships, have their origin and beginning in the home. In the home, the children are given the pressures or are given the intensities which will affect their lives in the future. And these in turn react upon the adult members of the family. So if we want to get past the period of discontent, we have to start where it is grounded, where the foundation of the whole matter rests. Not in our economic business life, not in world politics, not in the conflicts between Red Russia and Red China, not in Washington among the politicians, not on the scandal sheets of our newspapers. The real trouble begins in 2 or 3 people who should be trying to live together being unable to make the grade. From this point comes the bitterness, the disillusionment that leads to all kinds of stress. And if we had solved this problem centuries ago, we would probably never have produced a dictator, because a dictator is just a neurotic, and his neurosis started in some phase of his own personal environment. We have to try, therefore, to work out some practical way of solving these kinds of problems. Now, there are several approaches to this problem. The Western attitude toward it is to break through the pressure in some way and really head into a positive, aggressive type of solution. In this, we start flailing about and let the chips fall where they will. We speak our minds, say what we think, insult whoever we please, and say this is the way to solution. Well, if we have the right kind of people to work with, this aggressive measure will probably operate with some success. But usually it is too little and too late, and by that time we only make uncomfortable people a little more angry than they were before. Generally, it doesn't work. The individual who simply blurts out his own feelings is only encouraging everyone else to blurt out what they think about him. So it gets a little worse all the time. The Eastern method is more subtle and takes a great deal more integration of the individual, but I suspect essentially is the more successful. The individual who is uncomfortable and unhappy in his personal relationships must gradually try to create a different standard of consciousness within himself. Actually, all problems have to have their ultimate origin in the consciousness of the individual. And in some mysterious way, this consciousness has to be re-educated away from its besetting sin, and that is self-centeredness. Nearly every person is at his worst when he is thinking about himself. When he is trying desperately to advance his own cause, he becomes heartless and ruthless and indifferent to the needs of others. So in the Oriental way of working on this problem, we do escape the common danger that strikes in the West. In the East, for example, family problems are handled in a rather different way. The individual does not have scenes in his home. These things are almost unknown among many persons of other beliefs and races. The protection of the integration of the home is a major consideration in most Eastern peoples. It is tied closely to their religion. It is tied very closely to their tradition, and both religion and tradition are strong. Now, if religion and tradition are strong, the individual can remain a little weak and still survive. But if religion and tradition are weak, then greater pressure is placed upon the person. Where he has no social pattern to support him, he has to be much stronger and wiser if he wishes to create successful personal patterns for living. If we have strong conviction about value, then this conviction helps us all the way along to protect value. When, however, in our way of thinking, we have had a tendency to cast overboard most traditional and religious values, we are simply saying that we are losing our common mutual supports. Where two persons are devout in a faith, and both persons are trying to live that faith, you have a tremendously strong, solid ground. If that faith tells both these people that it is their moral duty to be patient, we're going to have more patience. And where both persons are patient, there is greater probability that things can be worked out in a reasonable way. If, however, we discard this entire concept of the virtue of patience, if we take away from the individual all of the spiritual support of the Ten Commandments and the Sermon on the Mount, we leave this person with very little to support him except his own purposes. We have in Christian Scripture tremendously powerful statements of cooperation. We are told that it is useless to assume that we believe in God unless we are friendly and kindly and peaceful among ourselves. That if we would truly say we love God, we must at the same time prove this by the practice of mutual affection. If this was a really powerful doctrine in our lives, we would have certain moral support from it. If we actually believed that kindness and peace and forgiveness were real dynamics, we wouldn't have so much grudge and so many deceits and pressures. Another group of supports come from tradition. Tradition is the respectable way of doing things. Tradition was the foundation of status among most older peoples. The individual, for example, who had a badly regulated home was disgraced by this circumstance alone. The individual whose children were not orderly was a social outcast. It wouldn't make any difference how much money he had, how well he lived, or how deep his swimming pool was. If his children were not courteous and well-mannered, he was ostracized. Now, with a tradition of that kind, nobody wanted to be different. The children did not want to be different from other children. And if other children were well-mannered, they wanted to be. But little by little, tradition has been discarded. We are so glad, happy, and proud of the fact that we are free from all the traditional burdens of the past that we forget the value of tradition. We forget the value of the standard or level upon which respectabilities were maintained. It was assumed that the individual who did not have a peaceful, integrated, well-regulated home could not be regarded as a gentleman or a lady. If you had children who damaged the neighbor's property, you belonged on the other side of the track. There was nothing to mitigate this. Every individual was judged by certain standards. And because these standards were the ones that were accepted, the individual either kept them or doomed himself to failure. Where higher standards of this kind were maintained, it was easier also for the family to protect itself. From the lack of these standards, it becomes almost impossible for a family to guard the character of its own children. The children no longer will respond to discipline because they are surrounded by undisciplined children whom are their associates. Little by little, the loss of tradition breaks down the whole pattern. And as this traditional pattern becomes more and more undermined, we have substituted for it the most miserable deception that there is, namely, that now religion and tradition are both secondary to success. The individual now is a person of quality simply because they have the larger house. What goes on in the house is no longer important. The individual, having deprived himself collectively of tradition and religion as moderators, as status symbolizers, must face the much more difficult and sometimes apparently almost impossible task of maintaining these standards by himself. One thing remains, however, and that is that discipline is possible for each person to exercise on his own life. We say, well, that won't do too much good. It isn't our own problem always that seems to loom the largest. But if we do have certain traditional and religious values which we personally accept, allowing others to, of course, accept what they will, but as far as our own lives are concerned, these values we will defend. If we take this type of attitude, we have certain securities possible to us. Also, the majority of folks who are in trouble have at least a suspicion of why they are in trouble. They do not really want to make the great effort to change themselves, but they do recognize some of the faults from which they suffer. And I have noticed in working with families that where a family is truly trying to work these problems out constructively, they do enjoy the respect of their associates and neighbors. The neighbor may have no intention of trying to live well himself, but he has a sneaking respect for the individual who does. He senses the reality of that which he will not even attempt to apply. We must then build the two principal strengths that have descended to us from the past, and we must adapt them to the personal problems of our own lives. Our religious foundations, fortunately, we can develop almost in any way that we please. We can assign certain values, and we can insist that we maintain them. And with all these values, we can also bear in mind the essential principles of all religious life. Principles of self-control, self-direction, kindliness, modesty, simplicity of life and conduct, dedication to principles, and the quiet refusal to compromise what we know in our own hearts to be true. If we begin working with these problems quietly within ourselves, we will gradually find sources of strength within ourselves. The more we can integrate a solid core of integrity within our own consciousness, the less dependent we become upon mutual understanding. We still want it, we still need it, but we are no longer hopelessly victimized for lack of it. The individual, for example, who cannot discuss his convictions with his own family or friends, has at least a certain degree of integration if he can clarify and simplify these convictions in himself and build his life around them in a manner to relax tension. I think the greatest gift that religion can give to the average person is that it can bring a certain kind of peace to the inner life. If this inner life is quiet, if it is built around a core of faith, then the pressure of the personality is reduced, and this pressure does not flow out so heavily upon other people. if we have more integration, we are not so dependent upon the cooperation of others. We no longer have to be understood by someone else, because we have gradually learned to understand not only ourselves, but why the other person does not understand. And out of it can come a very deep appreciation of value, and we become less demanding of cooperation, because we begin to appreciate why it is difficult to secure. Around the same concept, we can build the best part of our traditional way of life. We have one phase of tradition that we can always attempt to maintain, and that is the tradition of personal gentility, what Confucius so well called the superior person. Each of us has a humanity in ourselves which must be defended through conduct. We represent a certain kind of creature. We are different from all other species known on this earth. We have faculties and powers that they do not possess. We have abilities to express ourselves which they do not have. And we have resources within our own consciousness which can be developed according to our own insight and understanding. Man is therefore a kind of creature. He is human. And as Cicero pointed out, the term human, which we imply as being our state, also implies the overtone of humane. The human being is the creature in nature that is capable of living above a level of, we might say, animosities and antagonisms. The challenge of the human being is the power of that human being to live with other human beings in a humane relationship, or what might be termed the state of civilization. Civilization can only exist where individuals are civil. And civility means that the individual is decent and reasonable in his relationships with all other people. Man has this standard to maintain. It is his own humanity. When man practices the virtues of his kind, he is human. When he fails to practice the virtues of his kind, it is not right to say he is beast-like, because the beast is not an evil thing. It is only right to say that he is delinquent. So with a certain basic tradition, we realize that man is endowed with faculties and powers which permit him to be kind, permit him to be understanding, unselfish, thoughtful, gentle, friendly, tolerant. These are powers that man possesses. He alone possesses them of all creatures that we know. Therefore, it is upon these qualities that his superiority rests. And if he fails to exercise these qualities, he has lost his natural superiority in life. This was the Confucian code, that the superior person is simply one who recognizes the place which is ordained to him in nature by the way he was fashioned, and does everything possible to live up to the standard of his own being. And if he will do that with as much thoughtfulness and as much honesty as he can, he will gradually discover that his ways of life become more temperate, that his understanding becomes richer in value, that it is possible for him to reconcile many differences that previously disturbed him profoundly. The question then naturally arises, what happens around a person if he himself changes? This is not always easy to answer. Actually, it is a secondary question, but to most persons who think in terms of utilities, it is important. I think we can say that in the majority of cases, improvements achieved by a person within himself are reflected around him as better living conditions. This is not always true. There are some individuals who are insulted by the virtues of others. There are individuals who are offended when people try to live a little better. And for the most part, when we begin to control ourselves, we become a tremendous controlling force in the environment in which we live. And for the most part, the individual whose achievements are real and not assumed, who actually achieves certain improvement and lives this improvement every day of his life, this person does improve his environment. He does help others who are wavering to maintain their own values. He is less likely to precipitate emotional situations which cause others to lose control of their temperaments. One way in which we can help other people is not to press them to the point where they do lose self-control. But once this is lost, we become very violent and unreasonable beings. If we do, however, start to organize and integrate our own resources to the best of our abilities, we will discover more of what is of real value, and we can make judgments more acutely and more correctly on all problems. If we do have a reasonably high standard of living, and this can be maintained without injury to ourselves or others, then a greater internal integration helps us to enjoy this standard of living, rather than to be a victim of it. It helps us to have the courage to establish within our own life pattern principles that we think are right. It enables us to bring more order, discipline, and integration into those relationships which are under our influence. And if we are executives, our lines of influence are even greater. There is scarcely anyone in the world, however, who does not influence others to some degree. So to get hold of our problem here, to move away from being constantly immersed in problem, we have to begin to build within ourselves the foundations upon which a positive mental reaction to life can be established. We cannot build a positive mental life over a vacuum. We cannot be negative on the inside and positive on the outside without making fools of ourselves in the long run. Any positiveness which appears on the outside is either merely tyranny, or else it arises from positive integrations on the inside. If it shall so happen that we are seriously concerned with trying to get a better reaction to life, then we start in by building the simple, traditional values of things. We begin to estimate and understand what our abilities are, what our limitations are, and what our ethical code requires of us. No great ethical code of a really successful nature requires that we dominate other people. And one of the great problems of discontent is this continuous effort to run other people's lives. They object, sometimes build strong resistance against us, leading to frustration within our own natures. As people constantly say, I tried so hard to change him, but I just couldn't do it. This is a great cause of regret. Well, perhaps he needed changing. It's quite possible he did. But the only way we can change another person, really, is to help that other person to get insight. And the only time we can give them insight is when we have it. There is no use trying to impose one level of mentation upon another, or for two minds to lock in a deadly battle of mental energy to see which one can last the longest. The answer always is to build from a relaxed center. This we have to do. And in order to build from a relaxed center, we must finally give up doing those things which we should not ever have done. Nor must we demand victory where victory is impossible. Nor should we permit ourselves to build a personal code in which our own happiness depends upon the sacrifices of other people. As long as we have these wrong basic attitudes, we are going to be weak. As long as we are inadequate in ourselves, we are going to gradually fall into negative predicaments. To make the situation perhaps a little more simple and direct, I think that one thing we should always, or should all try to do, is to take an inventory of what we know. Some way to create at least an archetypal picture of the kind of person we believe the universe wants us to be. Now, if we have no experience in such thinking at all, it is probable that we'll get into trouble. The only answer then is that if we have no idea what a good person is, if we have no idea what constitutes a worthy code, if we can't say to ourselves that we have some suspicions above pure platitude on this subject, then we have to fall back upon the wisdom of the ancients, the old ways that were the traditional ways. If we want to form a good life without any true pattern to go by, then we have to pattern our lives upon the good lives that have gone before. For the average Christian thinker, the life of Christ constitutes an acceptable pattern. Others may find some kindly saint who suits their needs better. Others may choose from philanthropists or idealists or those who have made great sacrifice for common good. But we will observe that the world has gradually honored those most honorable. We see the kind of living that is remembered with gratitude by all mankind, and from the brief study of the biographies of such persons, we can get some idea of what constitutes a reasonably superior life. We will find, for instance, that in almost all great lives, lives that have really meant something to humanity, there was in those lives a wonderful personal humility. These people never really believed they were good. They were never trying to outshine anybody. They had a very natural, deep, simple faith. They found most of their consolation in worship, and they found their greatest worship in the service of their fellow men. These unselfish, impersonal, humble people are the world's great. Sometimes they are ignored and persecuted in their own day, but out of time they have emerged as the great examples. And these great examples can help us if other sources of inspiration are not immediately available to us. So out of some noble existence that we profoundly respect, we can gain the sense, at least, of what constitutes the good life. Perhaps through our own studies, if we are interested in comparative religion or in mysticism or philosophy or psychology, we will also be able to estimate something of our own need. We can realize the mistakes that we make. We can consider those parts of our natures where our own achievements have not been adequate. And we can say, from my studies or from my thoughtfulness, I know I should do this instead of what I am doing. But in one way or another, we must get this pattern of what might be considered proper purpose. And we must recognize the need of the continuous cultivation of this pattern. Now, how can we cultivate a pattern of this kind? Obviously, patterns, like little children, are born and grow and finally reach their maturity. We cannot start out from a more or less confused and discordant life and immediately and suddenly change everything. This is not reasonable or possible. We must continue to mature this pattern within ourselves until suddenly it begins to show on the outside. We must never put the pattern on the outside. Little by little, our own conviction, if we really develop it, will result in modification of conduct. If we begin to really believe something, and we work with what we believe, it will finally show. But we must not try immediately to make it show. It must not be a pressure of that nature. So we continue more and more with our own quiet meditation or approach to life. We give a little time every day to the quiet contemplation of pattern, of what it means. We begin to think through within ourselves our own responsibilities in life. We begin to discover the possibility of the joy in the fulfillment of responsibility rather than in the evasion of it. We think things through to discover that perhaps there has been a great deal more good than we have recognized, and that many things about which we create problems are not really the causes of problems. That perhaps we are objecting to things that are perfectly right because of some attitude in ourselves. So by degrees we search for the values in things, the realities in things. And as our devotional life increases, as our philosophical thinking deepens, our judgments become better. And as one by one we overcome the mistakes of conduct, this conduct naturally becomes a greater source of security to ourselves. We are no longer likely to do these things which make a lot of trouble for other people, nor are we likely to be thinking constantly of our own miseries. This is one of the reasons why certain phases of Oriental philosophy also help, by putting a universe together around a concept of law rather than around a concept of accident. The mechanistic theory that we have, this strange materialistic humanism that now dominates us, in which the universe is just a series of accidents, that nothing really means anything and nothing goes anywhere, and nothing came from anywhere. This kind of an attitude can never really help us to integrate anything. But if we can live in our own realization in a universe of law, we gradually learn why we should keep law. For instance, if we believe firmly in the operation of the law of cause and effect, or karma as it is termed in the moral philosophy of India, if we really believe this, it forms a wonderful discipline upon our own attitudes. But to have studied it, memorized it, and applied it to every other form of life except ourselves doesn't accomplish anything. But if we can really get it into our own consciousness that there are rules to this game, which we call living, and finally, in a natural humility, accept these rules and realize that we cannot afford to break them, we will almost have virtue thrust upon us. We will find so many inducements for a reasonable way of life that we can scarcely resist the inducement. What do you think would happen on a freeway if we suddenly were told that there were no laws and no police? Well, there are two schools of thought on this. There is one school of thought that also told us that the way to achieve equilibrium, so to say, or moderation, is to remove laws. Therefore, we were assured that if we would take the various restraints off of housing and food and these things after the World War, there would be no inflation. That was a beautiful thought. But the moment the restraints were removed, the inflation started and has never gotten down to earth since. So the idea that you can remove laws with impunity is rather optimism at this time. If we took away all these rules, the chances are we would have chaos. We might not have so many accidents because no one could move at all. But in any event, it would not be satisfactory. Today, people are a little careful. They do not want to drive through a red light because they suspect a policeman may be lurking around the corner somewhere. We are kept to a certain measure of personal honesty by fear of the common law of our country or community. So we do not break these rules unless we really feel that we can afford to pay the fines. On the other hand, far more inevitable than all the codes that we have ever built up, far more inevitable than that policeman around the corner, is the working of the law of cause and effect in nature. If we could realize this, if we could really make it stick in our own consciousness, we would have a very different kind of life in a very short time. Supposing we said to ourselves that every time an ulterior motive moves us to action, we have subjected ourselves to the inevitable fact that we will be exploited by someone else. Supposing we really believe that. Supposing we believed that every time we lost our temper, we were creating inevitable, unavoidable suffering. That every time we exhibited jealousy, every time we gossiped against our neighbor to his detriment, we were opening ourselves to an inevitable retribution, and that retribution was 1,000 times more certain than any physical law that we create in the area of legislation. It is always possible that we will go through the red light and there will be no policeman around, and we will have a strange sense of exaltation. But wherever any destructive or negative attitude takes hold of him, he is creating a pattern which will hurt him inevitably and completely. If he can get that thought firmly fixed in his mind, that this universal pattern operates absolutely, not because of some deity with a book sitting up in the sky, but because all of these patterns of action and of conduct have their own inevitable psychochemical reaction upon man, that they affect him just as surely as any law that can be imposed upon him. One man breaks a serious law and is sentenced to 10 years in prison. Another individual breaks a similar law and is sentenced to 10 years of private, mental, and emotional misery. He doesn't go to jail, but he suffers just the same. In fact, he might wish he was in jail and had a rest. So the problem that starts down in the beginning of this thing is the individual to more or less take his stand on some basic pattern of life. And the best pattern upon which to build is justice. Now, the moment he believes in this, and believes in it firmly, he knows that the misfortunes that occur to him, or the complications that arise in his life, are due to two causes. First, that the mistakes he is making now, which are producing the almost immediate reaction, and certain long-range mistakes that he has made in the past, which are continuing to affect him, and which must continue to be an effective force until their negative factor is exhausted. So the person is either in trouble because of what he's doing now or what he has done. Now, this might seem at the first to be a little bit a hard way of looking at things. But I think perhaps even if it is a little harder than we like, it is for the moment a help because of the tremendous softness with which we are trying to look at things all the time. We are looking in terms of nothing but ignoring and evading. And it is sometimes a very good thing to have these factors forced to our attention. Now, this operation of natural law has one difference from man-made law. In man-made law, the whole concept is built on punishment. We have 50,000 different ways of punishing an individual who does wrong, and practically no way of rewarding anybody who does right. The whole theory of law is based on punishment. The only thing we're thinking about is the evildoer. We have plenty of powers and facilities to explore the world of crime, but none with which to examine the world of virtue. We can get properly excited over the investigation of the mafia and all of this type of thing, but when many people live wonderful and sincere lives, nobody investigates anything. We are not really concerned in promoting good. We are concerned in curbing evil. In the universe, however, it isn't this way. The law of karma is just as much a good rewarding power as it is a punishing power. The law of karma tells us that if we do it right, something right must come from it. That every correction and improvement we make in our own nature must have its proper reward. The law of karma, therefore, is just as much concerned in bringing to the individual the rewards of right action as it is with apparent punishments. And if we can live in a world in which we finally come to realize that the only end to that which is wrong is to cause that which is right, we have the real philosophy of karma. That if we want a world in which we are no longer struggling with all these incessant calamities that depress us, somewhere the law of cause and effect must be moved into the positive angle of promoting good. We must stop doing the things that are wrong and begin to do the things that are right if we ever expect to have world peace. We will not have world peace by policing the mistakes alone. In the same way, in our personal lives and in our personal experiences with people, the end of the whole plan is that we must begin to quietly construct a pattern that must produce good in the fulfillment of the operation of law. We must cause good. We must so live as to cause good in ourselves. We must so conduct ourselves that in our relations with other persons we are only causing good. If the other person does not respond immediately, this does not affect the inevitable fact that the good which is caused will come about. So to get out of negative thinking, which is this continual nursing of the difficulty, we must begin to get the more positive attitude, the more correct, lawful attitude, not one based on Pollyanna and her platitudes, but based upon the simple operation of natural law. If we want to have help, which most people would like to have, then we must cause help. And we cause health by conserving mental and emotional and physical resources and using them properly. It may be that our karma from some past time will not permit us to be robust at any given moment. But unless we want to continue to be miserable, we must gradually cause misery to die within ourselves. We must bring about the end of misery. If we want to come to the point where our relations with other people are happy and just, we must bring to an end the unhappy and unjust relationships which we hold to any other creature. The beginning of a constructive attitude is a harmless life, a life in which no one is injured by anything that we do, a life in which the individual, if an injury must occur, will injure himself first, rather than to cause injury to another. That in every possible way we shall accept that the individual who has greater insight and greater understanding has greater responsibility. And in the case where a thoughtful or enlightened person is working with others who are less thoughtful or less enlightened, then the person who knows has the responsibility of leading the others as correctly as possible. That always the responsibility lies within the person who has the knowledge. And this knowledge must always be the source of graciousness, because when law reacts upon us, we do not want it to hit us in the face with a blow. Therefore, we should not strike others. When we feel like being cruel to another, let us remember that this is going to inevitably result in someone being cruel to us in our emergency, simply because we have not taken out of our own consciousness the cause of this cruelty. Well, we can say, but no matter what I do, there's no way I could prevent someone else from being cruel to me if they wanted to. Perhaps even though I might have very good karma, somebody else gets mad, they're going to say what they think. That is true. But if our own consciousness is right, the cruelty of the other person will not touch us. We will be able to transform it and transmute it by our own understanding. So the fact that another person is cruel to us does not mean that we have to suffer for it. We only have to suffer for it if our own consciousness on the level of karma has not relieved us from the need of that experience. So we get ourselves straightened out here on a proper basis for survival. We come finally to accept the great religion and tradition of law, and to realize that in this is our pattern and our hope, and also the continuous challenge that we must face. We are in our difficulties, we are where we are, we're going through what we're going through, because we are somewhere midstream in this process of attempting to understand and apply laws. So what we're trying to do, in our own way, is to discover law to be what it really is, the grace of God. We are trying to understand that law is like the kindly determination of the parent to try to bring the child to maturity with proper attitudes. that the so-called negative aspects of law are simply the necessary chastisements that have to come to the individual who is wandering away from the true standards of value. That we are not living in a universe that really is nothing but a group of policemen. We are living in a universe in which nature has its own way, a way sent by deity itself and involved into the mystery of creation. Namely, that deity as the eternal parent is determined to achieve the redemption and perfection of all of its children. There can be no lost souls, no individual who becomes so hopelessly immersed in the impossible that he cannot extricate himself. The very processes of birth and death and re-embodiment protect this. The law is that all things shall come in the fullness of time into the light of truth, and into the ability to regulate and manage their own affairs with honor and integrity. But to achieve this, we live within a pattern which is constantly challenging us to insight, understanding, and the living of a proper code. If we get hold of these principles, we have no longer any problem of negative thinking. There isn't any. There's only one kind of thinking if we really want to think straight, and that is to think in terms of growth. To think in terms of the simple fact that we live in a universe in order to learn. That we are not here primarily to be rich or to be happy or to be successful in the physical things. These may come, but they are of secondary importance and must be left behind anyway. What we are really here for is to grow. And a constructive mental attitude is one which enjoys growing. A positive mental attitude is one that believes in growth under law. And the individual who begins to understand these things cannot have any doubts and fears, because doubts and fears cannot exist in a universe that is divinely regulated by immutable processes. The only problem we have, that we ever have to worry about, is to make sure that we are keeping these rules. And we have every reason to know that we are endowed with faculties capable of keeping these rules. The law of karma exists only for us, because man is the only creature that has been so endowed that it has the choice between right and wrong action. And it's therefore only where this exists that law of karma operates. For the purpose of the law of karma is ultimately that all individuals shall choose right action. And nature keeps on teaching until this is the achieved end. So anywhere along the line, we can begin to operate in harmony with this. We can begin to realize the importance of kindly, honorable thinking. We can begin to realize the importance of certain unselfishness and self-sacrifice. We are no longer bound and dominated by ego. We are no longer ruthless in our actions. We are no longer vibrant with our own dissatisfactions. And simply recognizing that the universe is right, that we have the power to be right, we can go along pretty constructively. And we can have patience for other people, realizing that they are struggling along too. We can help when we can. But we will lose the idea or belief that it is necessary for us to build our happiness over the domination of other people. This is not the answer. Our own happiness is built through the directing and simplifying of our own conduct and bringing it into harmony with universal principles. If we operate according to those principles, we have nothing to fear. And if we do not operate in harmony with those principles, fear does no good. We have to get in line. We have to use what we believe. And if we are not yet well enough informed to make decisions, we must give the time and effort and thoughtfulness to learning to know more about the workings of the universe. so that we can finally make these decisions, make them clearly, and live them honorably. If we follow these procedures, there will be no negative thinking, because there is nothing left to be negative about. We do not live in a dishonest world, therefore negative thinking is useless. We live in a world of merits, of values. If we cooperate with value, it's a good world. If we cooperate with that which is not valuable, we suffer with it. So in our way of philosophy and our way of thinking, constructive thinking is not holding a platitudinous attitude about something. Constructive thinking is to build the entire mental pattern upon immutable foundations of justice, integrity, virtue, beauty, love, and truth. And if we start and build there, the rest of the pattern will unfold naturally, and most of our problems will solve themselves quietly, gradually, but inevitably. Well, time's up, so they... Well, I've got some nice announcements. You might as well stay for a couple of minutes. It's cooler here than it is outside. So I'd like to announce that our next talk, next Sunday, will be on new concepts in counseling. And we're going to go into a rather careful study of the broad directives and the broad patterns that we have come to understand as a result of over 40 years working with people. We want to tell you more or less a summary of the large principles that seem to have come out of all of this rather lengthy personal contact with others. I'd like to also announce that the PRS Center Study Group will meet upstairs after the lecture to discuss the talk of the morning. You're all invited to be present as guests of the study group. The present display in the library of Japanese material will close this Sunday afternoon. After today, for next week, we're going to have a new display, which will have to do with Persian, Indian paintings, miniatures, and interesting fragments of writing and other subjects of Oriental artistry. This collection will include material going back to the 9th century and is from our own basic collection, and we think you will find it very colorful and interesting, and it will open next Sunday. So we hope that you'll all be here to take a look at it and pick up the necessary schedules in order to know what our exhibits will be for the rest of this year. Don't forget that Mr. and Mrs. Barry are having a special buffet dinner for the benefit of our building fund on October 5th, which is a Saturday, by the way. And tickets are available from the friends in the lobby if you are interested to go to this dinner. There's still some tickets available, and we hope you will note the details on the bulletin board. I'd like to also note that the Men's Committee is also developing a project to help us with this final phase of clearing up the mortgage, which we think is about due. And if you would like to know their little project, which we think you might find rather interesting and a little bit exciting, we suggest that you speak to Mr. Olson, who will give you more details about that. Our gift shop is open, of course, and it's just about time to begin to think about tucking away those things which you're going to need for Christmas. Now, we found from long suffering that a very good time to start working on next Christmas is the day after New Year's. Because by doing it in that way and putting away a little now and a little then, you are not at all caught when Christmas arrives. And if you have one of those Christmas bank accounts, by the time it comes to draw it out, you can spend the money on yourself, because the Christmas gifts will already have been taken care of through the year. Well, you can't do that, but it's now getting close to the 1st of October, and we do have some interesting things which we hope will help with your Christmas shopping, so we strongly recommend you visit the gift shop. Here you can begin to accumulate the small things you will want later, and at the last minute there will be no tired feet, no hustle, no confusion, and you can relax and enjoy Christmas and not look forward to it as an emergency. So we hope you'll all visit the gift shop, and beginning on October 2nd, it will be open on Wednesday evening before the Wednesday evening lectures. Until then, however, it is open this afternoon. There on the book table, Psychic Malpractice, a lecture about whether or not we can be influenced against our will is now available. In connection with the talk this morning, we can recommend The Quiet Way. And in connection with the class talks that are going to start on Wednesday evening, we have an article in one of our journals which you can secure on Japanese flower arrangement that contains a number of principles that will help you to appreciate the new Zen seminar, which begins on Wednesday evening. So we thank you very kindly. Hope that you will visit around a little this afternoon, that we'll see you next week and perhaps on Wednesday evening. Thank you for being with us.